All right, folks, welcome to a new week. We are closing down towards the end. Today, we're going to begin talking about chapter 27, which focuses on, of course, the Cold War. And looking at this now, I picked this colorful slide background color, but I guess it's Cold War, so it should have been red. There's a little bit of red in there, so I don't know if that'll work. But anyway, so I'm going to break this down in three parts, three different parts about the kind of the Cold War in the chapter here. Remember, our packet will be due on Friday. We're going to have another quiz on Friday, just like the one we had last week. Let's kind of get started here talking a little bit about the Cold War. We're going to pick things up immediately upon after the dust is settled, or the cloud, I guess, is settled from the bombing of or the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. Okay, uh, and actually go a little bit before that. But you have to understand something, right? As soon as we drop those bombs, August 9th, August 6th and 9th, or even, I guess you could say, VJ Day, September 2nd, 1945, as soon as that happens, and the war is officially over, the power structure of the world is totally changed. Before the war, the power countries in the world, up in the 20th century to that point, are, kind of jumbled together. Japan is powerful, and obviously Germany, uh, France, England, Soviet Union, United States, they're all kind of in one big group, right? With the two most powerful at the time arguably being probably Great Britain and Germany. Well, when the dust settles from the war, you have way at the top is, of course, the United States. You got a big gap. You have the Soviet Union. You have another big gap. You have all those other guys, and then so on down the line to poor and third world countries. Okay, um, so where does the Cold War have its roots? Obviously, it's rooted in tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. These are two fundamentally different countries, right? The Soviet Union is communist, socialist. They have no free will of the people. They have no free market economy. People don't have choice. People have force. Stalin rules with terror and murder. Probably killed more people than Hitler did. In the United States, people have freedoms, have opportunities, have a market economy, have laissez-faire entrepreneurship and opportunities that exist for everybody. In the Soviet Union, you don't have those same opportunities, you don't have those same options. So these are two fundamentally different ideas, right? And that's going to be part of the big problem between these two during the Cold War. Okay, uh, our post-war vision essentially is for a world safe for democracy, is what we say. We want to create a world safe for democracy, where the Soviet Union wants to create a world, well, safe for communism. Now, let's take a look at this post-war vision for a second. When we mean a world safe for democracy, what that equals, what that ultimately means is A, we want to encourage democracy, but B, we also want to because by encouraging democracy, you're increasing your number of allies and supporters and things of that nature. Um, but also, right? But also, in this post-war vision, you're creating a world that is um, hopefully going to prevent future conflicts like the two world wars we'd had in the last 20 to 30 years. Okay, this can be achieved through the creation of the United Nations. A big part of our post-war vision is to create a UN, a United Nations, that is going to act as a peacekeeping body to prevent future conflicts and wars. And of course, the Soviet Union will be part of that United Nations. What the Soviet Union wants, when I say a world safe for communism, is they just want to make sure they can turn enough countries communist that they have supporters as well. If the United States is using this diplomatic approach to turn countries to democracy, the United or the Soviet Union is going to have an approach that might be a little bit forceful, but they're going to need an approach to turn countries communist so they have support of their own. It's like a big draft, and every country in the world is a free agent. One team is the U.S. and the other one is the Soviet Union, and they're just trying to draft people onto their team, using different means to do it, but they're trying to draft guys onto their team. Okay, so let's take a step back a couple years and talk about the war itself when we still have Roosevelt living, um, and talk about kind of diplomacy and how the relation worked between these three when they had a bigger fish to fry, of course, in Adolf Hitler. Okay, so the conference, they meet several times in the years uh, of the war. They first meet in late 1942 in Tehran, Iran. It's a Tehran conference. Not much happened here. They basically met, exchanged pleasantries. Hey, Churchill, how you doing? I'm Roosevelt. Sorry about the wheelchair. Hey, Stalin, how's the killing people going? Good. I heard you're horrible, and I'm happy to be working with you. And you got a big mustache too. I've seen worse though. See how. Not much happens at Tehran. Not much happens. Um, at the Tehran conference, other than them basically exchanging those pleasantries, getting to know each other a little bit, and most importantly, agreeing to meet again. Right? They agreed to meet again, which is a really big deal here because the next time they meet is at a place called Yalta, um, which is how much later is 19 February 1945, they meet in Yalta. And the Yalta is a conference where they come up with the Yalta Accords and kind of all the big stuff happens. So let's go over a little bit what is decided at the Yalta Accords. This is the important stuff here, okay? So outcomes of the Yalta Conference, which is known as the Yalta Accords, even though ultimately they're largely ineffective. But big things come out of it. For one, we get an agreement between the three big powers here, Britain, U.S., Soviet Union, to form what ultimately becomes the United Nations. That's a big deal. So number one, we get the formation of the United Nations. Number two, the Soviets pledged to help. The Soviets pledged to help in the war against Japan. They basically say, okay, when this whole conflict's over in Europe, we'll go ahead and join your side in the war against Japan. So that's a big deal. Um, they also decide to, um, which they weren't happy about, collectively handle Germany after the war by splitting Germany into four separate occupation zones. Okay, one each controlled by the Soviet Union, the U.S., Britain, and France. So you got the four occupation zones. Obviously, that's going to create a problem, and we'll get more on that later. Now, um, one of the bad things that happens is the Soviets are given control over the future of Poland. uh, Basically, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were arguing over Poland. We, obviously, the United States wanted future free democratic elections. The Soviets didn't. When Germany took over Poland, you had two separate factions, two separate political groups. Imagine the Republicans and Democrats going to totally separate places, different countries, and then when they come back, each one wants power. Well, we kind of backed off there and essentially told the Soviets that they could determine the future of Poland as long as they promised in quotation marks, free elections. But of course, that won't happen for over 40 years. Now, um, as an aside to that, to a couple smaller things they agree on is um, basically we tell we tell Japan um, to surrender or face total destruction. So in other words, we knew there was something in the works, and there was something in the works here. And if Japan wasn't going to surrender, then there was going to be a big problem. But we didn't exactly say what that was. And then finally, We agreed to the terms, all these countries, when I say we all agreed to the terms on trials for Nazi war criminals, for Nazi war belligerents. So 6 big outcomes. The 2 minor ones, Truman telling Japan to surrender, or I'm not sorry, Roosevelt telling Japan to surrender, face destruction, trials for Nazi war belligerents, but more importantly, the formation of the UN, the Soviets pledging to help against Japan, the collective handling of Germany after the war and its 4 occupation zones, and the future of Poland being determined. So, okay, so that's the Yalta Conference. That's what we see happen there. Talked about that. Yalta Accords. It's good. Now, problem. So the Potsdam Conference comes in July of 1945. So a couple things change in July of 1945, and this is why ultimately the Yalta Accords turned out to be a big failure, epic fail. By 1945, Roosevelt's dead. Churchill is not dead, but he's no longer prime minister. So they've been replaced by Harry Truman as president of the United States and a guy named Clement Attlee, who, right, as new prime minister of Great Britain. And that's going to be a big, big problem here because now all of a sudden the only guy that's been there through the whole process now has strengthened his claim to be able to get what he wants to get, and that, of course, is Joseph Stalin. There's the 3 of them in the first in Yalta. That's at their last meeting at Potsdam. We can see Roosevelt's looking a lot less healthy. I'm sorry, this is in Tehran, and this is in Yalta. So Roosevelt's looking a lot less healthy here a couple of years later. So the polio has really taken effect on him. All right, so let's talk about kind of the collapse of the peace. I already mentioned a little bit why Potsdam was a failure. When we got there, and Harry Truman really was a good president, one of my favorite presidents. I think he had to make the toughest decision any president ever had to make in the dropping of the bomb, and he really was a strong president for a lot of different reasons. But look, he'd only been president a brief time when Potsdam comes around, and he's totally overwhelmed and overshadowed by Stalin here because Stalin had been there before, right? Stalin knew what was going on, and that turned out to be a big failure for us in trying to establish this peace system with the Soviet Union and other countries, getting them in the United Nations and trying to build a positive peace for the future. Okay, this is what really helps get the Cold War started. We want to go in there, as the book says, Truman intended on getting 85% of what America wanted out of the Potsdam Conference. He leaves with much less than that, mostly because we really didn't have much leverage. With Roosevelt gone, again, and Churchill gone, Stalin really has the advantage and is able to press that and get what he wants, most notably not agreeing to the terms about free democratic elections in Poland, and also doing much more in terms of the splitting of Germany. What this results in is a separated Germany that's going to be separated in 2 countries, East and West, where the occupation zones of the United States, France, and Great Britain form a country called West Germany, and the part controlled by the Soviet Union, which included Berlin, was controlled by the Soviet Union, and of course became a communist country. So you have that problem. Okay, but the big advantage that Stalin had in being there the whole time, was really played out here. So what does this mean? Truman's a little bit disappointed, we'll say, in the outcome of Potsdam. What that means is that communism suddenly has become a big threat to us in America, right? No sooner do we wake up with the defeat of Hitler and the Japanese and this great moment for America is a great accomplishment to realize that there's another threat looming. And that threat isn't necessarily the embodiment in a person, kind of like Hitler was, but more a concept called communism that is essentially the opposite of what we believe as Americans and that's how it's portrayed to American people. And this is what's really going to get the Cold War going. So, what does that mean? Well, right away, we want to stop people from becoming communist. This brings China and Chiang Kai shek into the picture. Chiang Kai shek was the nationalist president of China, was not a very good guy and was not a very effective leader. Okay. The alternative in China of growing popularity was a communist leader named Mao Zedong. Now, Mao Zedong was extremely popular in China and probably, relative to Chiang Kai shek, was a better leader, but he was communist. Therefore, the United States does not like communism. We will not work with communism or with communists. Therefore, we have to continue to support Shek. We have to continue to support Chiang Kai shek in his revolution against, well, not his revolution, but in the revolution against the communist revolutionaries in China, who, of course, are supported by the Soviet Union. Thank you. Anyway, so what we have in this country is we're kind of forced to be involved in this difficult situation that we don't want to be in, because, again, we want to stop the spread of communism, which brings me to my next point, the idea of containment. Containment is simply this idea. We don't want to end communism. We simply want to stop its further spread, contain the further spread of communism. This is the containment doctrine as authored, essentially created by Harry Truman in the late 1940s. The containment doctrine also spent a ton of money. First notedly is the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was a $400 million gift of money we gave to Greece and Turkey so they wouldn't turn communist. Now, think about Greece and Turkey on the map, in particular Turkey. Why don't we want Turkey to be communist? I'll give you a hint. It's the same reason that the Soviet Union ultimately wants Cuba to be communist. Not because they like islands, Coronas, especially now, and baseball players, because it's near the United States, just like Turkey and Greece a little bit less, but mostly Turkey is near the Soviet Union, meaning we can put our missiles there. And if the Soviet Union does anything or threatens to do anything, we can show them our big shiny missiles, and maybe they won't do anything to provoke actual fighting and violence and bombs and nuclear proliferation and the end of mankind as we know it. So again, the Truman Doctrine is this first big investment in containment. And it's $400 million that we give to Greece and Turkey in their fight against the communists or the revolutions, the communist-supported revolutions that are going on in their countries. Now that's $400 million in 1947 dollars, right? We would spend even more in our efforts to impose containment, most notably through something called the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan looks at the $400 million spent in the Truman Doctrine a couple of years before. By the way, the Marshall Plan is named after our first secretary. It's named after George Marshall, who at this time was Secretary of State. And what this was Truman Doctrine on steroids. $12 billion to European countries to help them rebuild after the war and to not turn communist. Basically, the idea here is when a country is war torn and destroyed, it's very easy to take advantage of. So if we do our best to kind of help them get through, America, by the way, America can help them get through their financial challenges and the war and all the stuff that they're fighting, then, well, they'll remember that. And remember, it's America that helped give you this $12 billion to all these European countries. We like democracy, don't turn communist. $12 billion is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money to invest in Europe. It's saying a couple things. One, remember, it's America that gave you this, don't become communist. Number two, we are really, really committed now to making it known to the world that we are the world's predominant power, and we will spend the money to show that. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, I think, folks, for the day. And